Hi, it's Penny here, and today we're going to be going through all the books that I read in the month of January. So I read 13 things in the month of January, which means I'm going to have to try and be concise or we'll be here forever. But as usual, I will be doing this book battle style, which means I pair up all the books, I battle them against each other until we come up with the best book of the month. So my first battle is going to be between Malice by Gwynne and Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. So firstly, Malice by Gwynne. This was my DNF of the month, actually. So I think it was even last year I read the first half of this. And then recently my library hold came back through. I had to give up last time because my library copy needed to be returned. My library hold came through again and I gave it another go. And it was even worse coming back to it. I don't know why that was, but I just wasn't interested in any of these characters. This is kind of like a Viking-inspired fantasy story where we have this prophecy about this impending war between the gods and these two champions of either side that are gonna appear. And I didn't care about the prophecy. I didn't find it that interesting. I didn't think anything really about the world was very interesting. There's a lot of characters and they all seemed very same-ish to me. And I also didn't care about any of them. And then on top of that, I just found the writing very clunky and amateurish. Now, to be fair, this is Gwynne's debut, so maybe it does get better. And I am really sad that I've DNF'd this because I wanted to be part of Becca in the Books' read-along thing, but I just can't do it. Possibly, maybe I could try just reading some plot summaries for the first couple of books and then trying the audiobook of the third book, which is the only book in the series that's available via audiobook. But another part of me questions, like, given how much I didn't care about this, why would I bother? And the answer is FOMO. It's always FOMO and it's always a bad reason to do anything. So I think this is a DNF, which means that Theft of Swords really gets a free pass for this book battle. But I did really like Theft of Swords. So Theft of Swords, we are following Royce and Hadrian, who are these thieves. However, at least in the first two books, every thieving job they take seems like it's going to be fairly easy given how skilled they are. But it always turns out to be a big drama and they get pulled into like the politics and the magic of the world. We're slowly learning about the history of the world, which I'm finding really interesting. There's also a lot of really great humor in this that keeps it fun, and I think also helps a bit with the momentum. Like, I wouldn't say anything in this is blowing me away yet, but it's a very solid fantasy world, a lot of interesting things going on, and I'm definitely excited to see how things are gonna keep expanding as I get further through the series. So, I mean, I already gave it away, but if I'm putting Malice up against Theft of Swords, then, oh, I almost held up Malice, and that's completely wrong. Obviously, Theft of Swords is gonna be the winner of this battle. Then our next battle is actually gonna be between two fantasy series, in which these fantasy series have 3 realms. I'll explain. So we're gonna have Win and Truth by Brandon Sanderson up against Fate's Edge by Ilona Andrews. So in Wind and Truth, this is such a well-known series, a lot of people know about it, but one of the things that's going on in Wind and Truth, there's a lot of things going on in this series, but one of the things that's going on is we have our normal world, the physical realm, we have the cognitive realm where things are a little bit more magical, and then we have the spiritual realm where things are even more crazy and magical. That's a terrible explanation. And really, it's hard to talk about anything in the Stormlight Archives without spoilers, because this is a series that's 5 books that are all this chunky, you know? Like, I've got the whole series up here. It's big. There's a lot that's going on. And any synopsis I give of the beginning of the series is completely inadequate at describing what this last book was like. Although, what I can say is, I love the first book. The second book was even better. The third book was okay, but not quite as good as the first 2. The fourth book definitely wasn't as good. The fifth book, I have a lot of complaints about, and I'm probably going to do a separate review of the Stormlight Archives. I don't know how I'll keep that to any kind of concise length, but I think I'm going to try that, so I won't talk about this too much here because I could talk for a long time. And I do have a vlog of me reading it where I talked about a few things. But high level, I still think this is amazing in terms of what Brandon Sanderson has done with the world and a lot of the bigger ideas of what's gone on with the plot. But the individual characters' storylines in this and a lot of the the way that that was presented and the way that was written was incredibly disappointing to me. There's so much in this series that we didn't get to, and then so much that was included that I didn't care about as much as those other things. So it's a hard one. There's definitely some great things in this, but there's also a lot to complain about. Then up against that we have Fate's Edge. So this one has 3 realms in that this is set in a world where we have the Broken, which is our world that has no magic. We also have the Weird, where there is lots of magic. And then in between we have the Edge, where there's just a little bit of magic, and this book is way too shiny. So these books are set mostly in the Edge. Is that true? Quite a bit of this is actually in the Broken and the Weird as well, but our characters definitely come from the Edge. So in this one, we are following a girl named Audrey, whose family is all con men and criminals, and she's just kind of tried to make a clean break from them. However, her father has come back and said, please help us with this final heist. And she says, okay, but that's the end. So then once she's done that heist, there is another guy. What was his name? Calder. So he is part of the family from the girl from the previous book. So this is one of those series where each book in the series follows like a different romantic pairing, but there is kind of a bigger plot thread going on as well in terms of the fantastical elements. So Calder comes along to investigate this heist, and as part of that they get involved in these 2 bigger organizations, like a criminal organization and a more like a magical FBI organization, and Audrey and Calder end up kind of working together, and eventually there's a bit of a romance as a result. I would say I liked the first 2 books in the series better than this one, but I still had a fun time with this one. Actually, my favorite thing about this one was not the romantic pairing, but we also get the 2 children that were characters in the first book. So the main girl from the first book, her younger brothers, are main characters in this as well, or at least side characters, and I love them. They're kind of teenagers struggling with their magic and their lives and what they want to do and thinking they're going to be in trouble, so they kind of end up accidentally getting involved in the heist that Audrey and Calder are involved in. And like honestly, the most impressive thing you could ever do is write teenage boys in a way that I'm interested in. So well done. But I just think for this one, it was quite unfocused at times, which stopped me from really getting pulled into the story. And I also didn't ship the romance as much as I did the characters in the first 2 books in the series. So I had a lot of fun with this, but not my favorite in the series. And if I am battling these 2 up against each other, even though I have more complaints about Wind and Truth, I actually think I'm still going to pick Wind and Truth, because I did feel more connected with the characters, and I still think that what Brandon Sanderson has done with this series and the world is very impressive, even if it didn't live up to all my hopes and dreams. So we'll pick Wind and Truth as the winner of the battle. Okay, then let's have a magic school battle. So we're going to have Harrow the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir up against An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson, up against Witch Hat Atelier 3 by Kamome Shirahama. So let's start with Harrow the Ninth, which is probably the least obvious to fit in this magic school category. Harrow the Ninth is the sequel to Gideon the Ninth, the second book in this Locked Tomb series. I was going to say it's a trilogy, but I think it's going to be 4 books. Maybe. The 4th book is currently lost in time. We don't know when we'll get it. And I haven't yet picked up the 3rd book, but soon, very soon, because I loved this. It's very hard to talk about what it's about though. In the first book, we had Gideon and Harrow basically go to this necromancy type competition. Things were very unclear what needed to happen there. There was kind of a bit of a murder mystery, and it ended very high action and intense. Then in the second book, Harrow is basically dealing with everything that happened in the first book, but dealing very badly. It's kind of told through 2 timelines. The present timeline is told in second person, which I love when that's done well, and I think this was done well. So in that timeline, Harrow is trying to recover from the events of the first book and also learning more about the necromancy that they were studying in the first book. So that's how I'm fitting it into the magic school battle. Then there's also a past timeline, which is basically retelling the events of the first book from Harrow's perspective. However, that is so different from things that actually happened in the first book that you're just like, what is happening? And I love that confusion. Like for this whole book, everything is so strange. You never really know what's real and what's really going on. As I said, this has also got a fair amount of necromancy in it, and the descriptions of that are very graphic. There's a lot of like detailed descriptions of body parts and blood and flesh and bone, and it's quite disgusting at times. But again, I loved it. Like, this is probably the weirdest thing I've ever read. Is that true? Maybe. But I loved it so much. Then we have An Academy for Liars. So this has kind of been marketed as a dark academia story. We're following this woman whose life has kind of been falling apart, and then she gets an invitation to apply to this secret school where they learn the magic of persuasion, with the idea that certain people are so good at persuasion that they can maybe even change reality. And so we're just following along as our main character gets into this school and starts learning about things. There is also a very annoying romance with her professor that I think should have just been not done at all. That's not the kind of relationship I like. And I really just wanted to get into the weirdness of the magic. There were a few times where the magic was talked about in such a strange and interesting way. And I would be like, oh, I want to learn more about that. And then it wouldn't do anything with that. And then, as I said, the romance was very unsatisfying. And as well, if you wanted to look at this as a dark academia book, like often dark academia is all around like competition and toxic relationships and obsessiveness and like really pretentious characters. And a lot of the characters in this just weren't really very well developed. We didn't feel like we got to know any of them. Like, everything I'm saying is not an uncommon opinion. I've seen a lot of similar reviews. I just think from every aspect, this book had a lot of promise and then didn't deliver on it. So overall, disappointing. And then lastly, we have Witch Hat Atelier 3. So this is just a really cute manga series about these young girls learning this magic that's kind of like drawing based. There is a darker secret kind of simmering underneath, but we haven't got into much of that yet. And I think I did say that in January I was going to try to just binge a bunch of books so that I could get further into that bigger plot. But I didn't get the time, so it didn't happen. So once again, I've read one volume, and my complaint is that it's too slow for me. I want more of the bigger plot rather than just like the little hijinks of these girls in this school. So maybe I'll try and binge some more in February. Maybe. Because I really think it's on me that I'm not getting as much as I want from this. Because these only take like an hour to read each volume. So there's absolutely no reason why I only read one volume in January. I'm sure I could have found another hour or so around the place. But I guess I always prioritize other things, which maybe, I don't know, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy with this series where I'm not getting enough from it, so I don't read it. But then because I'm not reading it, I'm not getting enough from it. And continue. Let's try and break the cycle in February. Anyway, if I'm putting these three books up against each other, I feel like it's pretty obvious that I'm going to pick Harrow because this was such a great experience, like the weirdest experience, but so great. Okay, then let's talk sci-fi. So we have The Trials of Koli by Emma Carey up against Ancillary Mercy by Leckie. So The Trials of Koli is the second book in the Rampart trilogy. This is a post-apocalyptic world where the trees are now not safe to be around. If you go out in the forest, maybe they'll eat you. If you build a house and the wood isn't properly dead, maybe it'll eat you. It's a dangerous place. And as a result, humans are kind of living in these isolated villages. But they do still have a little bit of technology around. But they don't really understand this technology. And in Koli's village, the idea is that when you turn 16, you get tested to see whether the technology will wake for you. And we're mainly following along with Koli's discovery of what the world really is and like learning more about this technology. In the second book, Koli is mainly traveling towards something, and very luckily for him, because he is a complete idiot, like a lovable idiot, but like very frustrating. But luckily he is traveling with some really cool women. And then as well, I was surprised to get in the second book a second perspective, someone we had met from the first book, but I won't say who it is because I don't want to spoil it. But we're kind of getting their perspective alongside some of the things that happened in the first book. And I really enjoyed their perspective and everything that happened with them. Now, in the second book, those two perspectives didn't come together, but in the third book, I'm really excited to see how everything's going to come together because there's been so many interesting things put in place in this world. I definitely think still my favorite thing about this series is like the way that they're using the technology and the way that they're misunderstanding the technology and the world around them. Like, I just find this series such a joy to read. Like, it's so full of surprises and like different perspectives of things that we kind of just consider every day at the moment. It's just a great time. Then as well, I read the third book in the Imperial Reg trilogy by Leckie. So the first book, Ancillary Justice, we're following the Justice of Torren, who is a spaceship, and they are part of this big empire that's colonizing the universe. And we're following both a time when colonizing a planet didn't go well, and then 2,000 years in the future when the Justice of Torren is no longer a spaceship, they're just a single body. So I think I didn't really explain there that the Justice of Torren is like an AI spaceship that inhabits multiple bodies. So 2,000 years in the future when they're just one body, they're now like set on revenge for whatever happened to the rest of their ship. So that first book was very intense and we learned so much about the world. The second book was much more calm, slow paced. There was a lot of tea drinking, but I really liked the way that it looked into politics and culture. This third book still did do those things, and it still had kind of that calm, slow, cozy, tea drinking atmosphere, but the plot was a lot more scattered. I think I described this as like a slice of life. It just so happens that the person's life that you're following is someone that is a space captain who used to be an AI in the middle of a civil war where they're having to like battle to the death. But they're still dealing with like a lot of day-to-day stuff at the same time. It was a weird experience. I wouldn't say I didn't like it, but I also didn't think it was as good as the first two books in the series. Definitely my most favorite thing in this book was the aliens. So there are some aliens that this colonizing empire has come up against, and these aliens are so much more powerful that it's not really even a question of trying to colonize them. And they're also like incredibly different from humanity. So any interaction with them is very strange, but also so humorous in a completely ridiculous way, but I really loved it. Like every interaction with this alien that we get in this book had me smiling and laughing, and it was quite a nice balance to a lot of the heavier emotions in this book. So while I don't think this was as good as the rest of the series, still overall I love the series, and I still think there were some great parts in this book. However, if I am putting this up against the Trials of Koli, I do think I had more fun with the Trials of Koli. And I think I liked a lot of the ideas that were being introduced in the Trials of Koli more as well as it having like a much clearer plot and momentum that kind of took me along on the story. So we'll pick the Trials of Koli as the winner of this battle. Then everything else that I read in the month was short stories. So let's start with the more political ones first. We have Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin up against Invisible City by A.C. Buchanan. So both of these are actually kind of strange, which is often what you get with fantasy sci-fi short stories. But Emergency Skin is maybe the stranger one? Maybe. It's written in a way where you're just getting like this AI voice inside someone's head, and you can't hear anything that someone is saying, and you can't hear any of the questions that they're asking this AI in their head, but you can hear the responses. So the idea is that this is set in a world where certain people, the best and brightest, have basically escaped this dying world and gone to live on a new planet, but now they do need to go back to what they expect to be a dead planet. They need to go back there to get some things in order to continue to survive, and when they get there, it's not what they expected. So basically this person has been sent there with just this AI voice to guide them, and so we're getting the voice of that guidance. Throughout the story you kind of learn that what they're saying is a very particular perspective. I don't want to spoil the twist of it, but it is very hard to talk about the story without that. This is definitely a very political story, especially quite particular to the American perspective of the world, I think. And I think it's quite a satisfying read. Or, if you're on the other side of the politics of it, maybe a very dissatisfying read. I think either way, the the trick with this story is to kind of take a moment to breathe and think a little bit more about it, because even though it's a short story, I think there's a lot to think about with this story. Like, even though it seems very heavy-handed with the politics that it's talking about, and maybe at first read it could seem quite divisive in that way, again, I think it's one to just sit with and really think about what that means, rather than just going for the obvious meaning. But also, I imagine this was very satisfying for N.K. Jemisin to write. Then the other short story I read is Invisible City by A.C. Buchanan. This is a very emotional story, but again, a very strange one where it takes a while to figure out what's going on, which also makes it hard to talk about. But primarily we're following this old man who has come from this other city where there were some quite traumatic things happening, and the story is really about like what he's doing to kind of deal with being one of the few people that remembers that event. As I said, very emotional, but just so hard to talk about without talking about what it's really about. But I guess it's a lot about memory and trauma and history. Anyway, if I am putting these two books up against each other, it's actually kind of hard. Maybe the hardest battle of this video. I would say Emergency Skin was probably more creatively written, but Invisible City was probably more emotional. So which one do I feel like letting win today? My emotions or my mind? Do you know, I honestly can't decide. So I'm actually just going to pick Invisible City because it's written by a New Zealand author. And that's probably not a good reason, but I don't care. Okay, then we have The Birds and Other Stories by Daphne du Maurier up against The Mysterious Study of Dr. Sex by Tamsyn Muir. So firstly, The Birds and Other Stories. This is a story anthology, the first one being The Birds, which of course was made into that Alfred Hitchcock movie. I have seen the movie. The book is very similar in that it kind of escalates, and then maybe the book is even a little bit more open-ended than the movie. It's been a while since I saw the movie. But honestly, as someone who does have a fear of birds, like I think birds are beautiful creatures, but also don't come too close to me, especially in large groups. As someone with those feelings, this was very horrific, but also very satisfying in the way that it, I think, justified my fears. The way it's written really does kind of build that anticipation and like build your anxiety about what's happening. So I had a really good time with The Birds. However, the rest of the short stories in that anthology I liked less and less. There was a lot of characters that just were very tedious, awful people, and the twist to the short story wouldn't really happen until right near the end. So I would need to listen to like an hour or more of these tedious, boring, awful people living tedious, awful, horrible lives. And I just felt really tired by the end of that. So I kind of wish that I just read The Birds and not bothered with the rest. Then as well we have The Mysterious Study of Dr. Sex. So this is actually set in the world of the Locked Tomb. So Gideon, Harrow and Nona the Ninth. And this is like a prequel story following the characters from the Sixth House. So when I talked before about there being that necromancy competition, there are representatives from each of the 9 houses in the competition. And the Sixth House, we have a couple of characters that are very intelligent. So The Mysterious Study of Dr. Sex is basically like a locked room mystery. Again, there's a lot of necromancy involved and also a lot of world building about Sixth House, a lot of which I felt like went over my head, and I don't know if it really added anything to the story, but I would be interested to read it again once I've read all of the Locked Tomb series. And I feel like the whole Locked Tomb series is really that experience where so much of it you feel like it's going over your head, but I do think on a reread maybe I'll understand more. I guess we'll see. Anyway, I had a great time with The Mysterious Study of Dr. Sex. So I do think if I were just comparing it to The Birds would probably win. However, I'm comparing it against the whole anthology. And so for that reason, I'm going to pick The Mysterious Study of Dr. Sex as the winner. I should also say there's no sex in that short story. It seems like there's going to be, but that's not what it's about. Okay, then let's do a little semi-final round. So we'll start out with some of our fantasy books. We'll do Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan up against Win and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. And do you know, I rated both of these 3.5 stars, and I feel like that's wrong, but also right at the same time. Because, like, I have a lot more critiques about Win and Truth. However, some of the things that Win and Truth did and everything that it was attempting to do, I feel like are much more impressive. Whereas Theft of Swords isn't really trying to be at that same epic level, but for everything it is trying to do, it totally achieved it. So for that reason, I am going to pick Theft of Swords as the winner of the battle, because I think it achieved what it was trying to achieve, and I don't really have many critiques of it, and I'm expecting the series to get better and better as I go. I just feel like this was a very solid foundation, whereas When in Truth was like the end of a series that didn't live up to my expectations. I really hope that the Maurier Chronicles live up to my expectations. Anyway, Theft of Swords will go through to the next round. Then we'll have a sci-fi round, so we've got Harrow the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir up against The Trials of Koli. And I'm going to pick Harrow. I just loved it so much. I was confused the whole time, but it was just so intellectually stimulating, so weird, so different from anything else I've ever read. And The Trials of Koli actually is also quite different from everything I've read and intellectually stimulating, but just not quite to the level that Harrow the Ninth is. So Harrow the Ninth is going to go through to the next round as well. And then lastly, for short stories, we've got Invisible City by A.C. Buchanan up against The Mysterious Study of Dr. Sex by Tamsyn Muir. And for this one, I'm going to pick Invisible City because even though I enjoyed The Mysterious Study of Dr. Sex, as I said, there's a lot in there that I didn't really get. And also, it's just like a basic story giving you a little bit of a background for these characters, really. It definitely didn't have the emotional depth and like the strong themes that Invisible City had. So we'll put Invisible City through to the next round as well, and that means we're up to the final round. So we're going to have Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan up against Harrow the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir, up against Invisible City by A.C. Buchanan, and I feel like you know who the winner's going to be, but let's be systematic. I will first take away Invisible City just because it's a short story and so it didn't have the depth that the other two did. And then when it comes to Theft of Swords versus Harrow the Ninth, as I said, I thought Theft of Swords was very solid, but also just nothing mind-blowing, whereas Harrow is the exact definition of mind-blowing. So Harrow the Ninth is going to be the best book of the month. I had such a great time with it. I cannot wait to continue that series. In fact, I'm going to start it tonight and I'm so hyped about it. So let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about in this video. I would love to chat with you about them down in the comments. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well and I will see you next time.